broadcast button. We should be started recording. Here they come.
Here we are.
Let's jump it up quick.
Yeah, I'll give everyone a second to join. Hello, everyone. Got some in. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Okay.
Oops. Did I already mess up? No. Okay, great. Great. So they can look at that beautiful slide I made.
Hello, everyone. This is Coding in the Classroom, preparing students for the tech industry in 2020 with Christen Harper. I will be your room host assisting Ms. Harper during this training. I'm David Fields. If you need anything, please let me know through the chat so I can pass that along to Christen.
My Zoom window real quick. Okay. I'll wait just another minute for everyone to get in, but I can go ahead and give a little intro to what we're going to be covering. This is going to be kind of an overview of what it looks like to code in the classroom and what those classes usually end up looking like. And we're going to be doing a kind of survey of coding languages. I see a lot of teachers who get kind of confused with just the breadth of coding languages and what each one does. A lot of teachers ask me what is the best language to teach our students to get them jobs, to get them, you know, in the industry. And my counter question is always, well, what do they want to do? Because depending on what direction they want to go, if they want to build websites, if they want to code, you know, robots, if they want to go into physics, I mean, there's different coding languages for each industry. And so we're kind of going to go over some of the most popular languages and what they are used for, and which ones are best to teach beginners versus more advanced languages. And we'll dive into a little bit of computer science as well as me sharing the tools that I have found to be most helpful in the classroom, especially geared towards virtual learning, because I know a lot of you guys are, you know, facing that this semester and you may have never, you know, conducted a classroom virtually before. So I'm going to go over a little bit of my background, and then we'll jump into, you know, all these languages and what they mean and what they do. How many attendees do we have right now? Do you think we're ready to?
We have 142 in the room.
I think that's about how many we had signed up just a few days ago. And so I think I'm gonna go ahead and jump into the content. So this is Coding in the Classroom. Let me know if you got any questions, drop them in the chat. We're gonna be throwing up links and stuff in the chat too, so be watching that. So my name is Christen Harper. I am the Technology Education Coordinator for Deaf Catalyst, which is a program that is geared towards writing coding curriculum for schools, specifically in Tennessee, and specifically that fits CTE standards. And so we know that as a CTE teacher, it is, you know, hard to keep track of those standards sometimes, especially if you're, you know, a biology teacher, a gym teacher who's just been, you know, drafted into this, into a technology classroom. You don't know what any of these terms mean. You don't know, you know, the first thing about how to Google how to fit these standards. And so Deaf Catalyst has tried to take some of the guesswork out of that and has built curriculum that is specifically geared towards Tennessee CTE guidelines. We run out of Jackson, Tennessee, which is about 50 minutes out of Memphis. We run out of the Co, which is a makerspace, co-working space in Jackson. And our mission is to, make teachers' lives easier, make students' lives easier, and to help build the tech industry pipeline in Tennessee, because the Co is very business oriented and is working on building businesses in Tennessee. And we realized that it's hard for tech businesses to grow if they don't have employees to hire. And so we've focused on, reaching high school students and try to train them so that they can be the future employees for the tech companies that we hope will grow in Tennessee. So that's one of our missions at the Co, and Dev Catalyst is part of that mission. And if you have any questions about that, drop them in the chat. But we're going to jump into what Dev Catalyst specifically covers in our curriculum. So you know that I've been doing virtual learning for quite some time and building tools to help teachers do that. And so what my proficiency is in these three categories: novice web development, data development, and Raspberry Pi hardware development. And so we have different languages that we teach in each of these, because we have languages can cover a wide scope of topics. And so part of teaching in a coding class is just figuring out what language is going to get us from point A to point B easiest. And so we've had to solve this problem in our courses. Let me grab used to be able to get a pointer. Yes, a little laser pointer. So for each of these courses, we've picked a different language because they need different languages to accomplish. So for this first category, for novice web development, we have the students building a website, just a simple kind of advertisement website. It's got, usually they put a business's contact information, services, hours. It's just kind of a ad page. Doesn't have a lot of content, like a lot of function behind it. It's just kind of a static site. And for that, we teach them HTML and CSS primarily, and then a little bit of JavaScript if they want to get fancy. And we'll go over each of those languages in a second. For data dev, we've picked, they build a more dynamic site. Maybe the user can click buttons to track inventory for their business, or maybe they've got a shopping cart element, or they have something that's more interactive on that site. And so for a website with more interactivity, you need different languages to add on top of these initial static languages. And so we teach them how to do that, and we'll go over the languages that they use to do that too. And then finally, we got Raspberry Pi, our hardware dev course. And this course is has them building a Raspberry Pi project. If you're not familiar with Raspberry Pis, it's very much like an Arduino, if you're familiar with that. Otherwise, it's a tiny, like credit card sized microcomputer that's super cheap, $35, built for students basically, but it's been picked up by hobbyists and professionals, and is used for all sorts of things, and is used for a lot of hardware development stuff. Now, all those ideas that I had as a kid of all the inventions I wanted to do, like, oh man, I really wish I could, make a doorbell to my room, or build a robot or something like that. Raspberry Pi makes those, ideas that kids have very accessible, and that's what I love about it. And we'll go over the languages that we can use on a Raspberry Pi as well. And so if you're teaching a Raspberry Pi class, or if your school just got a grant that they just tossed a bunch of Raspberry Pis at you, logged a bunch of supplies, and you have no idea where to go, I'll try to touch on some of the languages that you can use, and the best languages for beginners as well for the Raspberry Pi, to kind of give you some direction as to what you should do with all those Raspberry Pis, because we find that sometimes schools get a lot of grant money for technology, for STEM, and they just start buying things, or administrators start buying things without really consulting their tech teachers. And now they've got this classroom full of stuff that you don't know what to do with. And so if you've got any questions about something that you bought, whether it's a 3D printer, Raspberry Pis, Spiros, whatever, I'm going to give my email at the end of this, and feel free to contact me and ask me, hey, what the heck is this? What do I do with this? And I can try to give you some resources for that. So let's go to the next slide. These are some of our students. Every year we pick about 20 of the best performing students. We have them enter their project that they make in one of these categories into a competition. And we pick 20 of the best ones, and we usually take them to San Francisco and tour tech companies like Google, LinkedIn, Facebook, HackerOne, which is a white hat hacking company, which is so cool, and just kind of expose them to the tech industry. These are all Tennessee students from across Tennessee that have participated in our program. This year, obviously, we couldn't take them to San Francisco, and so all of our students this year got a MacBook Pro, which I don't think is as fun as San Francisco, but you get a free computer, so it was still great. Let's jump into actually what all these coding languages do and what we use these coding languages for. There's so many of them, and here's just a few. These are the ones that we're going to go over in this course, but there's so many others, and it's just, you don't have time to teach all of this. You're not going to, you're not going to cover all these languages in computer science fundamentals. You're just not. You can survey them, and that's what we do in our course, is like we touch on each of these in one of our lessons, just so they're kind of, they have some name recognition. So if someone's talking about C or C++, they're like, okay, I know what that is. But we don't go into depth on some of these more advanced languages. And I'll try to connect the dots between which of these languages are best to talk about in each of the CTE information technology courses too. Let's split all these into some categories. We've got some languages for front-end development. We've got some languages for back-end development, and we've got programming languages. Front-end web development these two categories are basically languages to build websites. So if you are wanting to build a website, if you're doing one of the web design or web development CTE tracks, these are your guys. CSS, HTML, JavaScript, SQL, PHP, because these are what are used to build websites. If you are in computer science fundamentals, it really focuses more on programming languages. And you can see some overlap. JavaScript is in all three of these categories. And we'll go over why that is. That's a very versatile language that does a lot of different things. So now that we've kind of connected, we've split these into categories, let's go into what each one does. And if you've got questions, throw them in the chat, like, hey, I'm trying to do this, what language should I use? And I'll try to, and our co-host will interrupt me, and I'll try to answer those questions.
I actually do have a question that was perfect timing. Keaton Evans would like to know if you would recommend teaching this curriculum in middle school.
In middle school. We have middle schoolers that teach our curriculum. They are not eligible for the San Francisco trip or our competition, just because some of the companies that we tour require the minimum age be 16. But we do have, we do have middle schoolers participate in our curriculum, not our competition. So yes, absolutely. These, let me go back to these guys. These each align to, with the exception of data dev, we are still working on tracking the standards for this one, but novice web dev fits both coding 1 and the web design CTE track. Hardware dev or Raspberry Pi covers the computer science fundamentals track. And then data dev fits, you can make it fit coding 2 and web development, but we haven't, we have tools in our curriculum that help you track each of the standards and make sure all your students are going through the standards and can track their proficiency in the standards, and I'll go over that later. But for data dev, we don't have those tools built yet, but these two we do, if that makes sense. So here's the different categories. Let's go into the individual languages. So here's the front end web languages. HTML is basically the bones of a website. It's got all the content, it's got the text, the images, it tells the website or the browser where to find all the things that you're going to be putting on the website. It does not look pretty, and that's where CSS comes in. CSS is like the makeup that you put on top of CSS to make it look nice. And I've got two websites, or it's the same website next to each other. This one on the right here is with CSS applied to it. Over here is just HTML. So I deleted all the links to the CSS file. And sometimes you may have, or if you're, if you've been on the internet for a while, if a website malfunctions and doesn't load the CSS file, sometimes you see a website that looks like this, where you've got, the navigation kind of all just plain up here rather than in a neat little line right here. You've got the, images floating in the middle of nowhere without this nice, overlay on it. All the overlay is underneath it now, and the CSS is what puts all of the pieces in its place. It links all the nice fonts that you chose, all the colors, basically everything that makes the website look nice is CSS. And then HTML is just, hey, we're going to have a link to home, a link to about, a link to how it works, all of that. And so that's the difference between HTML and CSS. If you're teaching Web Design or Coding 1, HTML and CSS are a great beginner language. They need to know that before anything else. If you're teaching middle schoolers, even better. The sooner they get these basic web design concepts in their brain, the sooner they're going to be able to advance to the next level. And because this is the foundation of web design. And while web developer can avoid HTML and CSS, once you get to a higher level, they really work more with other languages to help build in the function and the dynamicness, if that's a word, of your site, rather than just being static like HTML and CSS. But that you cannot avoid HTML and CSS in web design, and so it's a great place to start for students. So back-end web languages are what is actually making a website function. This is a chart that we throw in our curriculum to illustrate how a website communicates with the web server and the developer computer. So you've got your client, this is who is accessing your website. And what they do is they hop into their browser, which is Google Chrome, Safari, Firefox, what have you. And the browser is basically like the interpreter of all of your code. And so you've got this guy right here, the developer, who's writing all of this code that the client's not going to understand if if the browser just displayed all this HTML code. You'd never find anything. And so what the browser does is it interprets that code and displays it in a way that the user can more easily understand. It says, okay, they want this image here, they want this link there, and it arranges it in the way that the developer intended. And so the way that they access those files that the developer is coding is through a web server. The developer will pull up their file through the browser with no problem. It doesn't need to be on a web server, and that's because you can just access it locally. You can open it like you would a Microsoft Word file through your browser, if that makes sense. For those who are really new to web design and computer science, if this is going over your head, don't worry, we're going to come back to some practical tips in a second. But I think it's important to understand how a website works if you're going to be teaching your students this, because it helps them troubleshoot their site more easily. So you've got your client computer, and when you type in at thecode.com, which is the code's website, it finds the code's web server, what we store our website on, what we store all these files that the developer is making. The developer uploads them to the web server, client computer says, hey, give me these files, the web server sends these files back and the browser interprets them. And so that's generally how websites work. And you've got these other, tools. You've got a text editor that the developer uses to write the code. You've got this pipeline, which is a set of tools that the developer uses to upload files to your web server. And then you've got all this software on the web server. This is the next level of HTML and CSS, basically. So you've got HTML and CSS right here that is making the site look pretty and arranged correctly. But then you've got the developer having this back end that they use to upload their files and to write files that build a database and store information. So that's really what we're looking at with back-end development, is that information that you're storing, because that's how a website actually goes to the next level. Any questions so far? I know that was kind of an information dump. You don't need to retain this for the rest of the workshop. Don't worry about this coming up or me quizzing on you on this.
Kimberly Brown has a question. Is there a reason why all of the certification tests at the state level are languages for web pages, even in coding?
I think it's a really web languages are really accessible for students. When you get into languages like programming languages, which we're about to go over, the application of those languages is a little more abstract. And you need to know a lot more. Know a lot more about coding and software development in order to make something tangible with a programming language. So programming languages are used for everything from software, which is a really abstract concept because it's not something that you can always see, to robotics, which takes a lot of know-how in order to actually make something that works. And so I think web languages are just easy for students to grasp. And at the end of the class, usually you can get students to build a website that is, tangible. And it really encourages the students to keep going, even if they don't keep going in designing websites. It's to have something at the end of a class that you can be like, I made this website. It helps motivate students to keep going. And if you started them out on, building software or something like that, they would get much more easily frustrated because it is a much more complicated process. And so I think that's probably why. Also, web design and web development is a huge industry. So it's really, accessible for students to go into after high school too. So that's probably fine. Let's see. So when we're talking about this huge back end, so this is kind of the front end development side of things right here. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about back end, this whole other 3/4 of the chart. And specifically this pipeline and this database software right here. And that language that we use to do, the languages that we use to do that is PHP and SQL. PHP is a very popular language that's been used to build everything from Facebook to mobile banking sites to blogs, anything where you're sifting through information. It's probably either PHP or a JavaScript framework, which we'll go over later. So this is it's a pretty accessible language once they've got their foundation of HTML and CSS and kind of understand how the back end of a website works. It works side by side with SQL, which is what is used to build basically a gigantic spreadsheet on the web server that stores information. So there's information on this web server that is built with SQL, and PHP is what goes in between right here to help the client sift through that information that's stored on the web server. And so they work hand in hand to try to make this client experience as dynamic as possible. So imagine you were on a news site and you had to log into your account. Well, you would log in, and based on the information that it has stored, the information that's stored with your account, it would say probably, "Hello, Christen," and it would feed your name into the website based on what's stored in your account, if that makes sense. And so the information that's displayed on the website can change based on user input. And usually that looks like, when you log into a mobile banking app, it shows you your transaction history, not someone else's transaction history. And that is, a dynamic website element that is often PHP and SQL are used to help the client sift through their transaction history or whatnot. We've got an example of this in our curriculum. This looks really ugly. That's because we stripped away all the CSS so they don't have to worry about it looking pretty. We just want to help them understand how it functions. And so here's a fake news site that we built. And we've got, a navigation right here. And then we've got a login. And so you would log in or sign up and type in your username and password. And once you log in, it will display all of the articles that you have saved on your account and help you sift through recent articles. It helps you search for articles. And that's the sort of dynamic website that we are trying to help them build in our data dev course. And this is basically what web development is teaching them, and a little bit of coding too. Coding too can also be the next level of programming languages. And so depending on what you want them to make and how you want to fill those standards in coding too, you can either focus on the next level of, web development or programming. Any questions so far? No, it's kind of like a lot of information. We're starting to get into some more advanced languages. It doesn't take long for these languages to get advanced, but I think you'll find once you nail the foundation languages and watch a few tutorials or, find a curriculum that you understand, it's not rocket science. Any questions?
Yes. Jeffrey Reploge, I'm not sure about that last name. Forgive me, Jeffrey. Would like to know if the CO will eventually be involved in cybersecurity.
The what?
The CO, I think the company, Dev Catalyst.
We're not developing them right now. We've talked about that in the future. Cybersecurity is, of course, a CTE standard that has a lot of information in it. And we hope to eventually start building a course for that in the next 2 or 3 years. We don't currently have it, but in our current data dev site, we always want to help the students build something that they can have at the end of the course and be like, I made this. And so what we do is we have them come up with a fictional site to build, like a fictional bank or a fictional store. So we don't have them trying to put people's actual information in their database that they're building, because that's, without knowing any cybersecurity, it could be disastrous. And so cybersecurity is the part of the CTE course that actually tries to get them to a professional level, which is why it's so important. But before they get there, it's important to nail the kind of the basics of data development so they know just how important cybersecurity is. Because you're putting people's information on a web server, And if you don't think about cybersecurity, anybody can get to it. If you've got an online site, an online shopping site, people are putting their credit card information in there. So that's why cybersecurity is so important, and is why we eventually do want to build a class for cybersecurity. But currently we only have those 3 courses that cover computer science foundations, coding 1 and coding 2, or web development. So let's see, how am I doing? Only got 15 minutes. Wow. Let's go.
Listen, I'll say Richard Hawkins has his hand up in our participant panel. Richard, if you would type your question in the chat, we'll get that to Christen.
Yes. So let's zoom through programming languages, because there's really only one programming language that I think middle school and high schoolers are ready for, and that is Python. We've got this whole stack of programming languages, everything from machine languages like binary, that's 1s and 0s, to assembly language, which is 1 step above that. In between here, you'd have languages like Fortran and Cobalt. And so as you go up, it becomes easier and easier for humans to understand. And as you go down here, it becomes easier and easier for computers to understand. So low level is for computers, high level is for humans and programmers. And so here's Python right here, which is where I would recommend you guys hang out as teachers teaching middle schoolers and high schoolers, because it is the most accessible, but it is also a professional language that is still used in the industry. JavaScript right here is also a high-level programming language. It can function as a programming language, but it's also used for websites. Python is what you would use if you're working with a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino. You can also use C++ if you've got some more advanced students. But what's interesting about a lot of these programming languages is they're all built off of each other. And so C right here is considered the grandfather of a lot of these other programming languages, because C++, C#, Java, JavaScript, Python, these are all built off of this lower language of C. And you've got, before a computer can understand what you've written in Python, it's got to be converted down into C, down into assembly language, and finally down into binary, because ultimately binary is the only language that a computer really truly understands. And so because you've got to convert it down this line before the computer can understand it, Python tends to be a little bit slower when it's compiling. But when I say slower, I don't mean like you have to sit there and wait. You know, C is used for operating systems and, you know, self-driving cars, things that need like milliseconds to compile. And so it just depends on what you're making. If you're coding a self-driving car and need it to react as soon as possible, you're going to use a lower level language because they're faster. But if you are just coding, you know, like a Raspberry Pi that is turning on an LED light, you don't need it to compile in milliseconds. And it would take you much longer to code a blinking light bulb in C than it would in Python. And so you've got that trade-off. Lower languages take longer to code, but they compile faster. Higher level languages are slower to compile, but are quicker to code, especially for high school students. So this is where I recommend that you guys hang out, because they're not going to be coding anything that requires the speed of a low level language. JavaScript frameworks are, you know, things that are built off of JavaScript. And if you've got a student that is just like zooming through your curriculum and you're teaching JavaScript, I'd recommend them looking into React right here, or Node.js, which are both tools used to build apps. If you're teaching app development, React would be a great option. It's pretty user-friendly, and there's lots of tutorials out there that React has even put out, and that would really help you teach that. Any questions?
Yes, I do have one from Kimberly Brown. She says, What textbooks do you recommend to teach Java, JavaScript, HTML that teaches it in a clean, organized fashion to help students better understand how to code in that language? Java sometimes seems disorganized after learning clean languages like C++, same for Python.
Yeah. So I'm sure you could find a textbook that lays it out. I think, I don't remember the author of one. So this link right here is where I'm putting the resources that I'm about to mention. I'm gonna go back and put in this textbook that I have in my head that I don't remember the name of. I'll link it in there too. It's kind of like a basic level JavaScript language, and I think there's one for HTML and CSS too. But ultimately, to get the most up-to-date information about a coding language, you can't really rely on a textbook. But there are lots of coding tutorials and YouTube videos and stuff that I'm about to mention that would help you. And some YouTubers are more organized about their material than others, and I've picked the ones that are my favorite that go through the information. But also Dev Catalyst goes through the information kind of like as you would a textbook, but online. I hope that answers your question. I'll try to put more resources in this link right here. So if you're on your computer, go ahead and type this in. If you've got if you've got a window open. Do you have a question ready for me?
There is questions, yeah, and also put that link in the chat as well. Christina Peterson would like to know, do you do anything on your company's website to engage or participate in the week of coding during the school year? Oh, hold on. What do you think of CodeSpaces as a fun intro to coding?
We do not, but the Week of Code is a fantastic event that happens every year. That I would highly recommend people, especially students that are really into coding, bring that up during the Week of Code as like a challenge for their students. I think it's a great way to get them involved. They kind of get to see the greater coding industry community, which is always really fun. So we are running out of time, and so I'm going to actually, if we've got a bunch of questions, I can spend the rest of the time on questions, and then you guys, the rest of my presentation is basically a bunch of coding resources that I linked on this in this link right here. And so if you want to go and just look at stuff later, I can spend the rest of the time answering questions. Because I feel like we might have a lot of questions.
I do have another one currently. It's Miss Dina Brown, says school psychologist here. Do you offer any consultation to assist teachers in adapting and accommodating for students with disabilities?
Yes. So we have teacher, like educator workshops that we have where we kind of talk to teachers more in a personal way. I go through some of our content, I answer questions, and a lot of times things come up about students with learning disabilities, or we have a lot of students that win the competition that are on the autism spectrum. Coding tends to be something that a lot of them pick up really quickly because it requires a lot of focus and a lot of that fixation that people on the spectrum sometimes have, and so they sometimes really thrive in that environment because they get kind of focused on their problem and don't stop until the problem's gone. And so we've been surprised to see how many people on the spectrum have gone on to win our competition. And so we have started to address, some of the questions that teachers have about their students with special needs in the classroom. I would say that people talk a lot about, how coding is for everyone, and you know, people with disabilities do great at it all the time. And I would say that that's not necessarily always true, because coding, of course, is like a language. And so if you have a student that has difficulty reading, you're going to find that they probably still have difficulties picking up coding, because it has a lot of, you know, words, and people with dyslexia might have some issues because that's a lot of text that, you know, they still struggle with. And so I absolutely want to affirm that, you know, coding has much less barrier to entry than a lot of subjects do. But some of the difficulties that students are going to have in other subjects, they're probably still going to have in coding, especially when it comes to reading and, yeah, you know, reading comprehension. But for students who are on the autistic spectrum, for students who aren't interested in other subjects, they might find that coding is just their niche. And we've seen that. We've had everyone, what's really cool is that we focus on rural communities, and these students in rural communities have never really had an experience with coding. And so they don't know what a coder looks like. They don't know that it's a, you know, industry that's dominated by men traditionally. And so we have everyone, you know, excelling in our course, because these rural communities, these kids who are jocks, these kids who are cheerleaders, these kids who haven't really found their place in, you know, have finally found something that they're really good at. And so we love seeing that. And so if you have more questions about that, feel free to email me. I'm going to put my email at the end of this presentation, so you can email me about any further questions about that.
Kristen, I also just want to let folks know that I've been putting the code and the keyword in the chat for them.
Mm-hmm. Could you also put my email as well? Hold on, let me.
Certainly.
Ta-da!
There it is. I'll put it right there.
Let me get to that. Feel free to explore the links that I put in that. I want to mention this before we go. My first resource that I put in there is actually where the link takes you, which is GitHub. GitHub is a code sharing site that the industry uses to help keep code consistent across computers and across people working on the code. They've got tutorials that teach you how to use it. And I would highly recommend you use this, especially if you're teaching a coding class virtually. It's a great way for students to collaborate on code. If this ends up confusing you, then I would recommend Code Sandbox, which is kind of like, you can use it kind of like Google Drive, but for code, where you have multiple students working on the same file, and it keeps it consistent, and you can see them typing in real time. And Code Sandbox has tutorials on that too. And so those are the two biggest resources that I wanted to share with you guys when it comes to virtual learning, because some of the hardest thing is I still have schools that keep code consistent by giving each student a USB drive and try to get them to keep all their code consistent on their USB drives between each student, and it just is a disaster. And so Code Sandbox and GitHub are like USB drives that are on the cloud, kind of like a Google Drive for code, where you've got it in the cloud, and you're, you know, uploading in it, and it's merging files together and trying to make sure that people's code is consistent. So when they're building their website or their, you know, app, everyone's got the same code that they're working on, and nothing's out of date. Okay. Any other questions? I know we're about 2 minutes from the end.
Getting a lot of great session, great information. I'm scrolling back up. I think we have one more question. It's difficult when, let's see. What is the difference between VS Code platform and the free VS Community 2019 platform?
So VS Code, for those who don't know, is one of the ones that I actually have listed as a great text editor. This is how, so you can't write code on Microsoft Word. You can't just start typing. It's got to be unformatted text, which is like Notepad or text editor on a Mac comes automatically installed on each of them. That's an unformatted text editor. And so here's some more advanced ones that are advanced. They're basically, they make it easier than what comes preloaded on a computer for students to write code and save it and upload it and, you know, whatnot. VS Code is just for writing the actual code. It's got lots of tools and extensions to do that. Visual Studio 2020 is an IDE, an integrated development environment. I'm probably getting that acronym wrong, but it has like another level of functionality for if you're building an app or if you're building a piece of software. And so if you are doing that, if you're building app or software, Visual Studio is probably what you want to go with. They're both free, which is great. I think there might be a not free version of Visual Studio, but Visual Studio is much harder to set up, and you can still write most of the stuff that you need on VS Code, which is also free. And so this is the one that I generally recommend for high school students because it's got so many extensions, so many tools, helps you keep your code neat. I can actually show you guys what it looks like. Ta-da! So this is Visual Studio Code. This is where I'm writing some PHP. I've got some HTML in here too. But ultimately, it just helps you color code your, and indent all your code correctly so it doesn't look like a mess. And it's got lots of extensions that help you keep it neat and tidy. Visual Studio has a lot more, but it's probably more than most high schoolers need on the front end, in the beginner level.
Christen, Jamie Ferguson would like to know if you recommend Swift for high school students.
Let's see. Swift is if I remember right, it's another app building, it's specifically for Apple apps. And it's a great tool. I think a lot, it requires a lot more setup than something like Atom does. Let me show you. Or sorry, not Atom, React. React is a JavaScript framework that is also used for building apps. Whenever you get into app building, there's another, kind of layer of setup that you have to do in order to build a preview of basically a cell phone on your computer. And so if you have more questions about that, you can email me, but I don't have anything in this presentation specifically about Swift. I've heard a lot of people still using it, and it's a really important language. But React is actually a tool that helps you build in both Swift and Java, which is the Android version. And so the industry is really going more towards React when it comes to app building, because you can kind of get the best of both worlds and try to build a cross-platform app rather than Swift for Apple and Java. You have to basically build two separate apps when you build with Swift, because you've got to build it for Apple and then you've got to build it for Android. So I'd probably recommend to start with React because it's also based in JavaScript, which is a very versatile language. Any other questions? I think we're over our time. I don't know when they're going to kick us off.
No, I think I haven't received any questions since then. They said they will close all rooms at 10 minutes over time.
Okay, so we've got till about 5 minutes, 6 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I can take more questions. I can go through some more of our resources. Or I can just, hang out.
Let's see. Julius Jackson has raised their hand. Julius, I think I have the capability of allowing you to talk. So let's see if this works, Julius. Okay, Julius, you should be able to talk now.
think he's muted. There we go.
Great session. Great session. Just wanted to make sure that we got the code for the session before you end it. I don't have a chat window, so I can type any messages in.
Okay.
The session code is honest, HONEST, and I've got my email up on the screen too. Feel free to email me with any more questions. If you're interested about Dev Catalyst and if you know you can implement that in your school, we do have some grants available that helps cover the cost. So you can email me about that. You may be eligible to get it for free depending on what county or area you're in. Or if you just have more questions about how, resources that you have in your classroom or what you need to teach and other resources that I didn't get to cover in this that we ran out of time for.
Christen, if you don't mind, I'll put that code and keyword out there again, just so folks will have that. I know it's important for them to get to their surveys. So the ID code is HGNZM. Again, that is HGNZM. And the keyword is honest, HONEST. HONEST.
Make sure you, take the survey for this session. Make sure you check out the resources that I have listed at this address right here, and that you get credit for this by entering the keyword honest. This has been great. I hope you guys have gotten a lot from this. I know it's kind of like an information vomit. There is so much to learn about coding languages. And for those of you who have been thrown into this world unwillingly, if you have been a biology teacher all this time or a gym teacher and you're suddenly finding yourself teaching a coding class, good luck to you. And I really hope that you find the resources that you need. Feel free to, again, email me about any questions that you have, because that's really what our organization is all about, is helping rural and unprepared teachers thrive in their classroom and help their students thrive in this industry that's very foreign to a lot of us.
Christen, I'm going to allow Terry Melton to talk. Terry, unmute and let us know what your question is.
The unmute button should be at the bottom left of your Zoom.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
You are.
Okay, I was just wondering if you can upload the PowerPoint presentation in the file section.
Yeah. Can I after the session? And
yes.
Oh,
absolutely. That would be great.
I'll make sure to get that to you guys.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Christen,
very informative.
Christen, the chat will continue to be live as well. If people want to come in and ask questions through that, if you continue to monitor that. And I generally continue to monitor it as well.
Yeah, I'll stick around and answer more questions if you guys got them. We'll probably kick us out in 2 minutes. Does anyone have a question that they want to squeeze in?
Oh, Jeffrey came back and said, will Dev Catalyst be using the same for the online learning again this year?
Yes.
Where my students sign up and sign in?
Yes, they will. We've got a platform that we just recently built last year that helps teachers track grades of quizzes that they take in our curriculum, helps them track standards, helps them so all their students have a login into our platform that they can go through all the lessons and take quizzes and do all that fun stuff. And gives teachers basically a grade book where they can keep. So if you guys are totally at a loss as to how you're going to conduct virtual classes this year, reach out to me and we can see if we can get you set up on Dev Catalyst if that's something that your school is interested in.
Jerry Wartenberg would like to know, how do we access the curriculum?
Contact me and we can talk about, grants that might be available for your school to cover it, or if your school is interested in buying a license for it. Let's see. Just contact me at my email, which is right here.
And I've been continuously putting that in the chat as well with the link to the session materials.
Yeah, I'll be around my email all day. I'll keep monitoring the chat. If you guys have questions, we're about to be kicked off. It's been great talking to you guys and answering your questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me.
And Christen, so you know, in the chats, you've had a lot of great jobs. Thank you. Great session. A lot of good feedback. Thanks.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I like working with teachers. I come from a family of teachers, so it's something that's close, near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, so I would say at the end of this, Bennett will be kicked out.
Yep. See y'all.
See you, Christen. Thank you.
Welcome.